I'm Bonnie Primm. We're on Tuesday Night Spotlight, and one of the things I hope that we do together is put a spotlight on certain aspects of how we think and what we do, and how we can change things. Can we make it better? If you're objective, which I am for someone else, but I'm subjective for me, that's something to remember, and that's why we reach out for people to see if we can help them. And if they get it, that's the most important part. Do you get it?
Yeah, I like the overall concept of you choose.
Mm-hmm.
You choose. So um
I choose.
you,
Yeah, that's the concept. The concept is I choose because you're going to be the end user and you don't want to point at somebody else and say you choose, especially if it isn't what you would choose. So I choose because it's all about me, and there's nothing wrong with that. I hope you know that. There's nothing wrong with it as long as it doesn't harm. I think of that oath that doctors take: do no harm. And certainly when you are choosing things, the intention, remember, awareness, intention, is to accomplish something that you choose. And I hope no one out there would choose to hurt somebody or dis, disingenuously hurt a situation by not thinking about it. That's disingenuous. So, yeah, it's about I choose. And when you say I like that you choose, you were really asking me to say I choose. And if you can remember that every time you go over that cliff, that cliff where you're not sure of something, you just go, I choose clarity. I choose health. I choose abundance. Every time you start to go down that other side where this will never happen for me, I am blah, 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 blah. We all do it. Self talk. It's called self talk. There was a wonderful man who was my teacher. He's still alive. And he wrote the book on what do you say when you talk to yourself. His name is Dr. Shad Helmstetter. He was the first person to get the self talk that we talk to ourselves all the time. And we often talk ourselves into unhappy places. Um, it is unhappy. What if you're always blaming yourself for your behavior? What if you're always blaming someone else? I love that one. It all comes back to us anyway. So I choose to be cheerful in the face of things that aren't cheerful, not to be cheerful in a situation that would be unacceptable by common manners. Um, you shouldn't. You, I shouldn't say you shouldn't. I shouldn't. I'm learning. Listen to me here. I should not do such and such and such a thing if it's going to mean whatever. But I can't tell you to not do it unless, of course, it's aimed at me and it's harmful. Then that's when you say, "Hey, stop that! You know, don't do that. Don't do that to me. Don't do it to anyone." So, can you see where the discernment? We talked about that the last time. To discernment in which direction do I take this conversation? Is it something we can both talk about? The you and the me, the you and the I, or is it something that really should be yours? You own it. You own it. It is a life lesson. It's a life lesson. We're all doing it all the time. Catching yourself is the real trigger to change. They have you ever heard of the rubber band method? Put a rubber band. This is old. Put a rubber band on, and if a thought comes up that is not helpful, maybe harmful, you you hold the thought that you have in a second. So when the thought starts to come up, you grab that rubber band and you snap it on your wrist. It is a physical pain that takes you away from, that place you were just about to leap into, that rabbit hole. One of the things that I've always enjoyed in life, not even knowing how creative it was creating environments. I even made doll houses out of shoe boxes when I was little, that kind of thing. And so I was very aware of proportion and fantasy. There's fantasy in that, and that's creative. And what it evolved into is every environment that I was in, I could alter so that it felt and looked wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that. Why would you want to create something that isn't wonderful? So when I had a home that I couldn't do anything to, it was down. It was a 2 story, actually a 2 story, a 3 story townhouse down at the ocean front. If that's where I live, near the ocean, and I couldn't make it work. Well, one of the issues that people have with multi-story homes is sometimes everything you want's on the other floor. That is a reality. That's where you have to get very clever with using the stairs as an up and down kind of thing. You bring things into that place. When you're going up, you take stuff. When you're coming down, you take stuff. But it wasn't just that simple. And I thought, how come I cannot do this? It was very effortless, really. And I I mentioned it to a friend who said, you ought to talk. You ought to read a book on feng shui. Well, there was one book out in the 90s that you could understand because it came from Taiwan, where the grandmasters from China were pushed during the Cultural Revolution in China.
Mm-hmm.
And if they got to Taiwan, they were lucky. Some of them didn't. And then from Taiwan, some went to London, which became a big feng shui capital. And then most of them, of course, would do the ocean of least resistance, and they would leave from Taiwan and cross the Pacific and go to California. And that was the beginning of a very famous man called Professor Lin Yang. He had a temple in Berkeley, California, and he was revered by people all over the world, all kinds of people, um, yogis from India, uh, religious people in the faiths that we're familiar with. It was just all of them were working on the same spiritual level. And it doesn't have to mean religion. Spiritual is there's we're invested and um, fascinated by other than what we see. We want to know more. So anyway, um, the book didn't help me at all. Somebody said you ought to call so and so at such and such. I called him, and he came and he looked around and he did some very in-depth um, observations, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And at the same time, this is the funny part, he fell asleep while I was talking with him. Very few people fall asleep when I'm talking with them, and that's pretty egotistical. And so we did some shifts and changes that were very feng shui. The problem was at the time I was in a marriage that when the person saw things were different, started putting them back the way they were. That told me two things. One, this is a person who is not, he didn't know why, who's not comfortable with change. And this is a person who is not admitting or allowing, something like that. And that was just so telling. Same time, 2 months later, I heard that the teacher from Berkeley, California, was coming to an area right down the street from me. And I signed up. I hope you all realize that what happens to us. When people call it coincidental, it's really serendipitous. There are no coincidences. Somewhere in my thinking, somewhere in the universe, wanting me to know something, there it was. Took that course, got certified as a practitioner, and never looked back. Before 9/11, we're going back before the 2000s. Um, it was a hot topic. There were episodes on television programs making fun, but they were talking about feng shui. It was great. There were cartoons in the New Yorker about feng shui.
Mm.
To this day, people will find a cartoon or something and send it to me. So it was out of the box. And obviously, most of us at the time, we're always in a box. We're in a box of our own making. You know, where did we grow up? Who did we grow up with? What were the values? So everything that we decide is based on what we know. And this was based on something I didn't know. And I loved it. And they had actually, um, they had international here in this country, in California, uh, in uh, Florida. Where else did I go? Oh, and locally, they came here. Some of the masters came here. Interesting. And because it was such a hot topic, people who loved hot topics, and I'm one of them, uh, went to it to find out what this was all about. So I took courses in feng shui for business, feng shui for health. Um, some of the presenters at these international places uh, were talking about art. There's feng shui to art. And I think we talked about this before. Just imagine a painting. Let's say there's a painting over here. And you are in the business of um, making people feel safe and listened to. And the painting is a Picasso or a Marc Chagall, full of energy and unusual art form, you know, the cubist and that sort of thing. I don't think that that particular painting or print, because if you had it, you'd be very wealthy. The rest, it's all in the museums of the world and New York. Um, it wouldn't be appropriate. So, feng shui of art is very appropriate. I've worked with people in their homes and I've asked them about, I don't judge, but I ask them why that particular piece of art is there. And they'll tell me, and I'll say, may I share with you what I'm thinking at this particular space? And I tell them, and I said, would you like to come into your home every day through that door and see orange and red flames, you know, in a painting? Is that calming? Unless you want that to lift you up. So you have to think, who am I talking to? Why am I talking to them? And what? And so you can see that in feng shui, it's basically a balancing act of harmony and balance. You know, do you walk into a space? Are you able to do that? So the idea kept on getting bigger and bigger. At the time, I wrote articles that went across the country or were in Prevention magazine, did oodles of classes at our local universities, and people loved it. And then it was almost like a fad, a 2,000-year-old fad. And things changed. The institutions changed. You know, they had to do things that were different. And of course, it may or may not have fit. And I was on to something else, but I have never left feng shui because you can feng shui your wardrobe, you can feng shui your food, you can feng shui your art. You know, it's all about, does it fit? Is it harmonious with the intent and the place? And if it is, and this is the bottom line that I love, There's only one reason for feng shui. One, and that is to make you comfortable and the people around you. That's why we do it, because we all know what the world is like. Whatever our world is, however you work, whatever it is, you know that the one place that you can exchange your ideas and have its arms get around you. I always use that. Feng Shui helps get its arms around you. It makes you safer. It makes you more stable. And it's the only place that you can affect your environment to have an effect to do whatever it is you want it to do. We have an area called Ghent. It's just marvelous. It's full of everybody, students, you know, um, professional people, lovely families, um, unusual people. It's wonderful. That's why I love it. And but but, by the way, every time you say but, you're you're denying whatever you had talked about before. So be careful when you use the word but, because and is an extension of ideas. So I moved out to the ocean front, and I had all of these watery things around me, and I was around all this water. I was uncomfortable. But you see, that's when I work with people, I find out where their comfort levels are. But that's why, what is best for you? Where are you going to where do you want to go with your life? Do you want to walk in the door and say, I am safe, I am home? Or do you want to walk into the door and find and have three wonderful dogs come up and say, I'm so glad you're home, come play? You know, is that you have to decide what that is. Just in case that's true, you're going to be really careful with the furniture, aren't you?
Right.
You anytime you add, by the way, in feng shui, fire is one of the elements. We are fire. So every time you add another person into your environment, or an animal, or a goldfish, you're adding more fire. And you know the secret of the aquarium in the dentist's office, don't you? I'm drawing the aquarium. The secret is in that aquarium are all five elements of feng shui. There's water, there's wood, you know, the little cute little dwarf things that we put in aquariums. And there's fire, the fish.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is earth, which is the sand. And then there's metal, which really is sometimes a little metal things. It's the rocks that we put in. Uh, Metal is concentrated earth. And so there it is. And I think dentists, whether they're conscious of it or not, or whether they're taught that in dental school, it puts people at ease. Watching fish, kind of go in and out. That's why we like to go to aquariums, because it's just so calming and slow down. And so that's why they put those kinds of things in offices that might be suited towards high energy. How about lawyers' offices, especially the ones who deal with the public? You know, everyone who needs a lawyer is certainly not there because they're calm and have no issues. So put an aquarium in there.
Right.
Doctors of all kinds. Now, somebody has to take care of it. May I also add that every time you add something, you're adding a little responsibility. Who's going to take care of it? And if you don't, this is feng shui, if you don't take care of it properly, that's anything, then it goes on the negative side instead of the positive side. So, it's a cautionary tale. Only add things to your life that you can manage, both intellectually and physically, and emotionally, because it'll just become another job. What we're trying to do is not create another job. We're trying to have have the environment support you, and keep you calm. Because when you go out that door every morning, even if you're retired, you're going to find it's not the world that you may want. It might be the things that happen. Every one of us, every one of us. And I'm speaking to you because when was the last time that the day looked exactly the way you wanted it to? When when was that? You know, you can't find your keys. Um, whoops, something happens to your transportation. Um, Something happens to somebody in your family or a dear friend. Something happens in the weather. So you didn't plan that. You know, this is something that is part of life. So why wouldn't you make the place where you're supposed to find sustenance and support and I'm going to say calm. I don't know how many people don't want calm, especially in our world today. Uh, why wouldn't you want that? Even if you want a calm environment and you put on some CD that is wild world music, or I can't even think of some of the entertainers today, and you sit down in your calm space listening to this uplifting music for you because you need it. It's not that you make your life quiet. You make it so that it does both things for you because balance is what we're always looking for. We're always looking for it. Something in us wants us to have that. So I do classes, and there's different ways of doing it, by the way. And then I'll tell you some other things I'm doing. This is one of them, podcasts. Um, okay, I'm going to I'm going to divert. That's what I do. I call it marginalizing, and I don't mean making smaller. I mean writing in the margin. You know, here's your subject, and next thing I know, I'm thinking of all these things that fit. You know, and one of them is I am I am not young. I am not going to say I'm old, but I will say I've been around a long enough time to observe, to try things out, to find things out. And I think the world is very youth oriented. I'm not making this up. You already know it. Everybody has to look a certain way, has to act a certain way. And all of the social networking out there is telling you how to think, how to look, and it seems awfully superficial. It's sort of like we want people to look and act and think the same way. So, one of the things I think this whole experiment is that we're doing right now is to put out an experiential level to wisdom in literature. Um, Someone my age would be called a crone. Now, every time you use the word crone, you always think of something that's pretty negative. But she's the wise woman. They're wisdom keepers. And it's not that your wisdom is more or less than anybody else's, but boy, do you have it because you've been there and done that. You've been through different periods of time. Um, you know, we remember, I speak to friends, remember when? And then I start thinking, oh my goodness, I'm starting to sound like my grandmother, you know. Um, and yes, if you live long enough, you will start sounding like people in your family because they remember when. And you know, it's a treasure. It's an absolute treasure. I find that when I'm talking with people and they're talking with me about things that it's something that you can align yourself with, make yourself happy that somebody else remembers it. Um, so, besides feng shui and besides this reaching out to say there's somebody else out there who looks different, sounds different, and wants to share that with people so that they too can identify. I think you just said, you know, I think what you're talking about, we identify with. Well, I think there's an identification with this period of time that I happen to be in. I can't make everybody happy. I can't speak to all people. But what is that? Um, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. You've heard that. Uh, it's a marvelous thing in the universe. It's a uh, it's an energy that if this if this situation we're in right now happened 10 years ago, it wouldn't be appropriate. But now it is, or I wouldn't be doing it. It wouldn't. The synchronicity of working with Neil on something that he saw, and he's the age of my grandsons. How is that? That tells you that there's a place. Actually, there's a place for everything. The beauty of social networking, I think, is that there is so much to choose from. The other piece of social networking is the discernment of the information that you're hearing, speaking, observing. And, that is a much deeper piece to this than not. So
True.
my website is
And
www.
one more time, because go.
My website is bonnieprimm.com. That's it. Bonnie Primm. That's two M's. I'm not that kind of prim. Um, and the other piece that I did for many, many, many years was I was in advertising and marketing. I owned an ad agency. If you want to get to see what's out there, that's a good place for it to happen. So, what I bring to the table, and I think Neil's trying to, put the pieces together here, the blocks, is that I was in that very, very real world. And then I never left it because what I bring to feng shui is a very Western idea. It's not Asian as much as it's Western because that's where I'm coming from, and people need to understand information from where they're coming from. So yes, you can reach me through my website. That means you can reach me through email, and there's telephone in there. And I'm getting ready to make these wonderful things public through YouTube and whatever else is out there, you know. And it's an awful lot of stuff. I'm not even going to mention one of them that may just disappear thanks to our Eastern friends on on another continent. So you don't know. This is a don't know time, and I don't just mean to leave you with a don't know time. But if you understand it's a don't know time, then you'll be open to the things that you're observing. And your observations, and in the Buddhist philosophy, don't react, observe. It's also called living in the moment. And that way you're not reacting. Nice thing to remember, you know? So, adios.